Hello, hello. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to Matter. We're ready to get started. How many of you have been to Matter before? Awesome. We've been open just over 2 years, and when we would ask this question in the beginning, not nearly as many hands. This is probably about 75% of you, so many of you are actually already familiar with Matter. So nice to have you back again. But I'll give you a quick overview, and then I'll introduce our speakers and welcome our partners for today. So Matter, 2 years ago, we opened with a vision to bring the community together and create opportunities for collaboration between industry and innovators to solve big problems in healthcare and the next sort of future products and services that would change healthcare for the better. We have about 185 to 200, depending upon who you ask on any given time, early stage entrepreneurs working to build their businesses. Typically, they can be from one person to up to 5, but they are across all facets of healthcare, so med device, health IT, diagnostic, biopharma. And we provide them with the services, the resources, and the support they need and access into industry to help them be successful and accelerate that path to commercialization. And on the other side of our business, we work with about 70 industry partners, Garrett being one of them, and UL as well, who are interested in tapping into that pipeline of early stage innovation to fill gaps within their own business. As well as to come in and collaborate with one another in a neutral environment where they can, again, look at challenges from different perspectives and try and solve those together. And so Matter has really been, I think, well received in the community, both regionally here in Chicago and as we expand outside of the region, are starting to get attention from partners as well as startups and innovators from around the country. And we really think that this is a model that is how we're going to solve big problems in healthcare. If you can bring together different perspectives, if you can bring together different innovators, researchers, scientists, industry leaders, and look at problems from different perspectives, that's the way that we're going to solve problems and move the industry forward. So very happy to have you here today. Hopefully, if you haven't been to other events that Matter, check out our website, as well as if you'd like to sign up for our newsletter. We have a weekly events newsletter that'll let you know about what kind of events are happening in the space, and there's a whole host of different topics and ideas that you can get a part of. And we'd love to see more of you and get involved and spread this mission of really trying to improve the future of healthcare that we are focused on. I want to talk about one particular event that is happening in a few weeks that we're pretty excited about that I think many of you may find interesting. We are going to launch Matter's largest scale health challenge focused on a disease called IPF, and it is a pulmonary disease that causes scarring tissue of the lungs and unfortunately has sort of a brutal end, and there's no cures. And it's called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, IPF. And we are going to launch a large-scale challenge to improve the quality of life of both patients and caregivers. And we think this is going to be really interesting because we're bringing together a cross-section of the community who's both inside focused on IPF as well as outside other innovators. And what we've discovered, and one of the areas that'll be hot for focus on this challenge, is respiratory therapy, oxygen therapy. And so there's a lot of room for impact and disruption in the med device side of things and apps that can control oxygen therapy and ways of thinking about that very differently. So check out our website for that event. There's actually a flyer on your chair, but we'd love to see you. The event launches on April 27th, and this is going to be a large-scale challenge with a large purse. So we'll be announcing more later, but we'd love to have you. So I want to introduce our partners, Garrett Technologies and UL, who are participating in this event today and pulling this together, and thank you for doing it here at Matter. We're excited to have you. I'm going to introduce Michael Garrett, who's going to be our first speaker, and He will come up in a minute. Obviously, Garrett Technology, a design firm in Northbrook, I believe, focused on med device and product design, has a lot of really interesting things to talk about today that I think you're going to find rewarding. And then we're going to hear from Laura Élan from UL next after. And I don't know if, Michael, you'll do a better intro than I do, but Laura's the practice lead, right, in cybersecurity, and one of the areas of big focus is as medical device, right, and healthcare. So we're excited to have her. And then Bernard Cappy, where are you? Oh, there he is. Bernhard, who is one of our Matter members, who's been here since the beginning and a huge supporter of our mission from Orthogonal, will be joining them on a panel as the third discussion. So I'm going to welcome Michael. Thank you, and enjoy today.
First of all, thanks for coming, and thanks for Matter and UL for participating in this event with us. Appreciate it. And a little bit about Garrett Technologies. We do product development, consulting, electronic software development, agency certification, agency consulting, product development, electronics and software, class 2, class 3 medical devices, and everything we do these days is basically connected somehow. Either through a Bluetooth connection to the phone, using the phone as a gateway, using a Wi-Fi connection. That leads to this topic of coexistence, what the regulatory agencies expect for coexistence, how you need to manage coexistence, and in the development of your products. So I'll start with the slide presentation here. Also, Garrett Technologies does offer coexistence testing services. So this is kind of the agenda for today. We've got the definition of coexistence. We'll start there, and then we'll run through these one by one as we go along. And we've got a case study that I came up with, which kind of shows all of the different touch points that you might have in a connected device. And I drank a whole bunch of coffee and invented this device yesterday. So we could enter this in this IPF study that they just talked about, actually. So definition of coexistence. Anybody here doing a device right now that they're going to do a submission for, FDA submission, or going to be? Yeah, okay. So wireless coexistence, more and more our devices that we design have to be able to function around many, many other devices with very, very diverse mechanisms of communication, different RF protocols, different functions. You see there, this is a list of them. This is actually out of a standard. Interestingly enough, there is a standard in the industrial community for managing wireless coexistence, but they're just emerging for the medical community right now. Interesting story, you see a microwave oven here. There was just a story where there's a radio telescope that was getting corrupted, and they thought they had discovered a signal. For 10 years, they didn't realize that every time somebody opened the microwave when it was on, they would see one of these astrological events. Coexistence. But you see all the different diverse devices. Of course, in a medical device, you have some additional devices. If you're in an operating room, you might have an electrosurgical piece of gear. You might be operating in an MI or a CT environment. Those devices, in addition to having their modes of therapy or their modes of signal acquisition, usually have multiple radios on them, and they're also communicating to multiple devices around them. We can expect an exponential increase in devices being connected at any given time. Your phone right now has multiple radios in it. It's not just a phone. It has Bluetooth Classic, it has BTLE, it can do LTE, GSM, so your phone has probably 6 different radios inside of it, and a lot of times they're working in conjunction with each other and polling, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So in addition to having devices that are wireless, you have more and more protocols inside these devices and more different modulation schemes, et cetera, which is very important when you're considering the design of your particular device. So the key question is, does the system perform its intended function in a realistic RF environment with multiple like devices and other devices? Notice I said like devices. Likely to be in the environment. So we get to the definition of coexistence, and I like the second one here, to live in peace with each other, especially as a matter of policy. Policy could be the FDA, it could be the FCC. The definition of coexistence related to radio communications is diverse and rapidly expanding and changing. And the reason is because the modulation schemes and the complexity of medical devices is increasing exponentially, as well as the data bandwidth that devices need to communicate. And as the data bandwidth gets wider and wider, more spectrum is used, and as more spectrum is used, there's more and more spectral sharing issues that come along. Now, if you've ever done research into coexistence, it's really hard to figure out what to do. The FDA asks you for specific information about how your device coexists. And if you do an internet search and you dial in coexistence, you will find high complexity coexistence definitions based on physical channels. So I'm gonna actually point out two distinctions with coexistence. One is the device coexistence in an expected environment. And this is kind of what the FDA, when they first started, this is what they kind of stated that they were looking for. Does your device coexist with other devices? And then there is radio coexistence, what I call in the channel. And in the channel is, does your radio that you purchased actually coexist with radios based on the way that radio is designed? Like I could put a Bluetooth module in my device. Standards-wise, it's called an 802.4.15, I think, or 15.4. So that device, you're buying it, it is Bluetooth compatible. You're buying it because it can coexist with other Bluetooth and Wi-Fi devices because the manufacturer has tested it to the 802.15.4 standard. This is different. Device coexistence in an expected environment. Now, we can design a device and put a radio in it that totally blows this. It doesn't work in the channel. We can design a medical device that has a whole bunch of radios that work in the channel, but they don't work as a medical device because we didn't design them to coexist with other devices or even themselves. So these are all interrelated. Standards-wise, there is, for a medical device, there's EMC testing. This is electromagnetic compatibility testing. And for a long time, this is what you did to your device. And this testing assures that your device is immune to certain types of radiation and doesn't emit radiation so that other devices don't interfere with you, you don't interfere with it. And this includes electrostatic discharge, et cetera. The FDA came out and said, if you have a complex system of medical devices, that's not going to test it. Next, you have cybersecurity, which Laura will be addressing next. And there's an intersection between all these. There's coexistence using emerging standards. So there's starting to be a couple of standards right now, and these are the standards emerging on test processes for coexistence. And then you have the physical layer standard. So I buy a Wi-Fi module, I put it in my part. The Wi-Fi module has been tested to meet, this is the 802.1 known as Wi-Fi, ABGN is the different modes. I'm pretty much assured that my device is going to coexist with other devices and Wi-Fi devices, Bluetooth devices, because it's a FCC approved radio. It's been through, I can check on all of that, lineage of that device. But not necessarily. So there's some diligence that has to happen there. Let's see, risk analysis. So when you're designing a complex system, one of the first places you really need to start, one of the first documents that the FDA is going to ask you for is your risk analysis, your mitigations, in this context, related to the fact that there's a radio inside your device. What kind of radio is it? How does it communicate? And how did you use that radio to keep patients safe? So this is 14971 is the risk analysis standard called out under 60601 and the general standard for risk analysis. AMI TR57 is a standard related to risk analysis for cybersecurity, not coexistence. You will not find coexistence in there. These are the three major documents from the FDA about wireless devices, and each one has different amounts of, not different amounts of information. Each one, it covers different areas of technology related to wireless. In this particular one, it talks about specifically RF in medical devices. In this one, it talks about, okay, you have a medical device, it communicates to the cloud. Is it a medical device? That's what this one really covers. So if you want to say, you know what, I'm building a device, it's a cloud-based data acquisition for something which exists in the field, is my server a medical device? That's in here. And then this is cybersecurity, which Laura will get into that. So this is what the FDA says about cybersecurity. These FDA documents are really good. They're very low on words, but very high on content. And also they're very high on expectation on the device manufacturers to make sure devices are safe. So these are really good documents as a starting place to figure out how to get your device safe with a wireless device. So wireless coexistence. Risks, notice risks, first word, and potential performance issues that might be associated with wireless coexistence in a shared wireless environment, keyword environment, should be addressed by a testing and analysis with other devices and products or devices that can be expected to be located in the wireless medical device's intended use environment. Notice they're talking about environment. They're talking about if I have 200 radios in an operating room, how are they all going to work together? Did you test them to make sure they all work together? I could go out and put a Wi-Fi module in my medical device. I can go test it with a whole bunch of Wi-Fi modules. And if I didn't pick the right transmission protocol, it's not going to work. It works as a Wi-Fi device, coexists for Wi-Fi, but doesn't work as a medical device because I have designed my device such that they don't coexist with each other or other devices. So there's a little bit of what they expect to see in a 510K submission or in any type of a submission based on the RF subsystem of your device. So you've got a summary of the coexistence testing set of findings analysis. What interferers did you use? This is very important. We're going to get into that in a second. Because it's not obvious. The interferers might not be obvious. And this is the part of coexistence testing where a certain amount of use case specific knowledge, intended use knowledge is required. You don't just do a Wi-Fi test and say it works as a Wi-Fi device. What happened? Okay. How the device and wireless functions were monitored during the testing, if it's reasonable to expect multiple units of the subjected wireless medical device to be used in the same vicinity. And very, very important, and we'll get into this in this study this use case that I have, the association and security between devices. Think about a health club. You've got 50 treadmills, and everybody's wearing a Polar heart band. How did the Polar heart band get associated with that specific treadmill? Is the treadmill next to you, his user might have a dead battery, and you might be hooked up to his treadmill. So provisioning of devices. Anybody that's bought a Wi-Fi Belkin outlet plug or any of these IoT devices, the provisioning is not obvious all the time. How do you get that thing on your network? How do you make sure it stays on your network? So this is a summary of an example of a questionnaire sent back by the FDA of information they wanted to see in a 510K related to wireless in a device. So this is these are the questions that they asked. They wanted a description of the device, detailed information of the technology on the device, power, frequency modulation, data rate protocol, security mechanisms. Next talk. Risk hazards associated with the medical device related to communication, risks and hazards and mitigation. So we'll get into that in a second. Summary of the claims of the wireless system. What does the wireless system actually do? You have to describe to them what does it do, and you know, you have to know what it's going to do in order to assess the risk and design mitigations. Summary of testing, justifications, labeling, very important. What's the quality of service required for your device to actually work? If I put this in a Wi-Fi environment that has very low quality of service, is the device going to work? Is it going to function? Security provisions, device labeling, and then communicating to other devices, mobile medical applications. Identify the make and model of mobile devices that the device can operate with. All documentation for verification, firmware risks, updates, and mitigations. This is in a 510K for a medical device that contains a wireless system. That's the list of things that you need to provide in your 510K and design for to make sure that you meet the requirements intended for your device. Okay, so I invented this example yesterday. This is a case study in a wireless device. And I do a lot of conversations with startups and people doing connected devices and companies, and this study here is just filled with pitfalls. So we'll go through this. I'm actually going to read this. So, but this is this is the indications of use for a device which I invented here yesterday. This is what you would file in your 510K and say, this is what my device does. Inside of here, as I'm going through here, just think about the complexity of what's happening and how the wireless systems in here need to coexist. This is going to seem like a simple system. It's going to seem like a Fitbit, basically. But notice the complexity. Well, I'll read it from here. All right, here we go. We'll pick this apart, okay? And the reason we need to pick this apart is because to do coexistence testing effectively, we need to test all the different ways that these radios coexist with each other and with other devices. So we have to understand the use case. And we're going to design use cases to do the testing because we're going to simulate a use case when we do the testing. Okay, so here's this device. The Respi arm-worn pulse oximeter heart rate and respiration monitor is intended for use by COPD patients to continuously monitor SpO2 heart rate using plethysmography or a polar chest strap, respiratory rate using a RespiMon, which is a mouth-worn device which monitors your breathing rate, during home and physical therapy, and communicate that data to a mobile device, phone, user's phone, for communication to the Respi Cloud Gateway. There's a cloud. The Respi Cloud Gateway stores the user's data, allowing the user to view trends and annotate notes on a mobile device, and allows a clinician to monitor progress of physical condition and therapy compliance from a computer using a standard web browser. So this is like a description of a pretty detailed wireless device that you might see being developed right now because of all this connectivity and IoT capability. Okay, now we go further. The clinician may adjust bronchodilator dosage based on the data collected using a Respi Cloud calculated Respi index. Now it's getting complicated. Now you've just put your system in the path of medication delivery. The mobile device receives usage information from the Respi dilator inhaler, which is already 510K approved. So now the inhaler is communicating to my phone and pushes that data to the Respi Cloud. If the Respi alarm detects that the patient has fallen or is incapacitated, it sends a push message to a service that phones the patient to assess condition, alerts a clinician. The Respi Cloud can use a gateway to send information to an EMR. Exponentially complex. Now it's getting even more complex. Still within reason, though, you could see we could all enter this in the competition that Matter's having here. The device consists of a wrist-worn pulse oximeter plethysmograph. Plethysmograph is infrared pulse detection, so it shines infrared light in and measures the pulsatile motion, containing a Bluetooth LE radio, Radio 1. A RespiMon Airway respiration monitor containing a proprietary 915 megahertz radio. I designed it because it cost 25 cents. in the disposable. For the communication to the respi arm, radio 2, radio 1. So now I got 2 different radios. And a 2.4 gig ANT radio for use with the polar chest. Now I got 3 radios. In addition, the respi dilator, 4 radios, can communicate usage and dosage information using a BTL radio to the mobile device. Mobile device on my hip when I'm using it, 5 radios. The RespiMon airway respiration monitor, polar strap, respi dilator are disposable and can be replaced by the user periodically. How do I associate this, the polar strap, when I throw it out? How do I say, okay, this is the device you need to talk to? The respi arm collects data during exercise sessions and using the user's mobile device pushes that data to the cloud. If the respi arm is not connected to the mobile device, interruption in service, drug delivery halted, feedback to the physician halted, is internally stored and uploaded when the connection is made at a later time. So now I have a gap in data collection. I had a degradation of a communication channel. I have a gap in my data stream to my physician who is prescribing my drug dose. The data's the user may be using a home or a health club-based treadmill for exercise. Multiple units can be used in a health club or clinical environments. 100 radios. 10 people, 100 radios. Now, treadmill, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth Classic, 900 megahertz heart rate, 400 megahertz heart rate. 5 radios per treadmill. Okay? So that's 50 more radios. It's 150 radios. Okay. Last sentence. The killer, actually. The respi arm firmware can be updated by the user using the mobile application. The mobile application can retrieve firmware updates from the respi cloud and update the firmware in the respi arm. The respi arm can then push a firmware update to the RespiMon. Exponential complexity, but not unreasonable for what needs to be done today in healthcare. This is, you know, when you read this description, this is a very, very full functioning, state-of-the-art wireless IoT device. But you can see the number of radios, and this is the FDA, you know, there's an exponential number of radios coming into play here. How do we assure that these devices operate in this sea of radios and all different protocols? And there's a couple pitfalls here inside of here, which I'll get to in a second. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to do a couple of things as designers. We need to tease out what the use cases are, and then we need to figure out what the risks are for a given use case, and then figure out how we're going to mitigate that risk. This has nothing to do with the radio. It has nothing to do with Wi-Fi, BTLE. They're going to work. My 915 megahertz radio might not work, depending on how I design that. We'll get into that in a second. But most of the complexity which you see here is not radio related. It's design related. It's how we implemented the communication mechanisms to have 150 radios coexist and all end up at the right target, end up on the server at the right IP address, right patient, right doctor, and the dose for the medication has to come back. So what are our use cases? So use case identification, we're typically going to have to annotate the use cases to figure out how the radios are used, these 150 radios, in these different scenarios so we can design test cases to figure out how they coexist. Now in the design and development process, the design of the actual device, they probably went through a use case, user research, to figure out how the device was actually going to be used. A good user research firm will have figured out the sequence of events, use case diagrams, etc. I'm looking at the next page, you're not. There we go. Use cases. So what are use cases? Unboxing the device and installing the batteries. Connecting the respi arm to the mobile application. So I'm connecting the respi arm to my phone. creating a user account on the Respi cloud and setting up user information. That cannot be ignored. Bernhard and his team at Orthogonal, that's their specialty on the cloud side. Associating the airway device with the user's Respi arm or replacing the device. So how do I make the association from the breath monitor to the Respi arm? I might be doing in a clinic. There might be 5 other devices. Associating a polar chest strap to the Respi arm. Putting on the device, good typing, putting on the device and preparing for exercise. Exercising at home on a treadmill. I have a 915 megahertz DECT phone as a portable phone in my house. Well, that's my heart rate meter frequency. I just added another radio. I got a cell phone while I'm exercising, because while I'm exercising and the RespiMon is working, I'm going to be using my Bluetooth headset to talk on my cell phone, which is right here. That's radio number 16 or something like that. I'm sitting next to the microwave wire and 2 wireless routers because my exercise machine is in my kitchen or something. I don't know. My kitchen has internet. On the mobile device, Respi. So now you got the mobile device, you got the Respi arm to phone, you got the phone to LTE, the Wi-Fi router. Exercising at a health club or clinic. I already described how many radios are on a modern treadmill, right? There's a whole bunch of them on a treadmill. And I might be talking on the cell phone, and I might be located in a clinic and a hospital where there's 10 treadmills. I need to upload monitor data, and then I need to update the firmware. So for each one of these use cases, I need to go in and I need to figure out what radios are present and how I'm going to test against those radios to make sure my device can work with all these radios. And that the radio technology that I've chosen is going to work here. Because remember, I told you I designed my own low-cost 915 megahertz radio. Maybe I didn't do a good job at it. Maybe I designed I put in a 10-cent radio in there. I have it sitting at one frequency. It's sending modulation data. You get 10 of them in the room. They're all at the same frequency. They all crash. That's my little phone up here, right? So there's hazards and risks are usually device dependent. So I've got a list of generic causes of what could be problems with the system. In the system that I described, and we won't go through this in great deal right now, there's a whole bunch of device association which needs to happen. Like, what is the risk that my Respi arm is talking to the RespiMon on the person next to me? What if my Respi arm, when it doesn't detect the RespiMon, I designed it to search for other RespiMons and take the first one that it got. That's not out of the question. People do that. It's, go look for a radio signal and just attach yourself to the first one that shows up. Because in a home environment, the first one that shows up is usually the only one, not in a clinic. So this device association, this topic is the device working with like objects. That the FDA actually, that's the FDA's wording, like objects, and it's non-trivial. So we can think of a lot of risks and hazards here. The main risks and hazards that happen in a robust communication system are signal throughput and degradation. A working system will absolutely be guaranteed to have signal degradation and signal loss, packet collisions for any type of radio. You have to design around that, especially as radios get more complex. 5 years from now, radios will not look the same. The radio will figure out what to do. We're barely gonna know what it's doing. It's gonna figure it out. Because spectrum is so expensive. It costs $500 million per megahertz. So if you're a cell phone company, you need 26 megahertz. That's what it costs to start a cell phone company. Those are auctions, FCC auctions. I don't know why I brought that up, but there you go. So some of the hazards. Communication ceases. That's an obvious one. Battery dies. I put on an aluminum foil hat. Something happens, right? The communication ceases for many different reasons. You have to expect that this is going to happen. You have to plan for it. You can't say my radio is always going to be on. Is Comcast always on? Is the projector always on? All right. So we have a communication becomes intermittent, normal to zero throughput. So the communication packet rate might go vroom, 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 vroom. So think about the Respimon in this scenario. You know, let's say the Respimon is communicating to the phone and it's dumping all this data in real time, and all of a sudden it starts to grind to a halt. Well, as a developer, I would have to know, well, I should be queuing up that data and caching it so that in the face of this degradation, I can catch up later. Data gets corrupted by collisions, going to happen. Especially like if I design my 915 device and I make it really super simple, and I don't count for the fact that there's 10 of them in the room. They're all going to transmit at maybe the same time. Some of the information will get degraded. Devices get confused during operation, device addressing. So my Respimon loses communication with my polar heart rate and says, oh, I see one, and it's person 2 treadmills down. Provision or device associations change without the user knowledge. So like your computer, if you walk into a Starbucks, undoubtedly the Xfinity window will pop up 50 times as you try to click and get rid of it. But your actual connection can actually change without you knowing it. Your Wi-Fi could go out and you could be signed up to Xfinity, and you leave your home, your Xfinity, you go to Starbucks and you sit down, your computer associates it with that. So this is a change without user knowledge. You know, in the Respimon is really complicated because how do you know what polar strap or what monitoring device you're actually paired to? I didn't say there was a display on there. So you have to use your mobile device to query the RespiArm to give you a list of things that you're connected to make sure it's you. And then you've got firmware upgrade fails or is compromised. Okay, so I said that all these things can download a firmware upgrade from the web through my phone, and my phone is going to update the firmware. That's not a coexistence issue, it's a huge security issue. So what does coexistence testing actually look like? All right, so this is the test. What's the test? I'm going to turn on this monitor here. So if you've ever wondered what the spectrum looks like, it looks like this. Does it look like that? Oh, hang on one sec. This will be worth it, I promise. Oh. All right, what are we looking at here? All right, so this is 2.4 gig. This is Wi-Fi channel 1 and 2. So there's a lot going on here. This is spectrum. This is time going this way. All of this stuff that's happening here are different radios trying to see if they can communicate. It's like, check the channel. Is it open? Yes, blast out a packet. What you're seeing there is, you can't really see the Bluetooth devices, but Bluetooth, Bluetooth LE, Bluetooth Classic, and Wi-Fi are all sitting right there. So you can see people's phones connecting. If I told you all to take your phones out of your pocket and turn on and off your Wi-Fi setting, that thing would go crazy. You just see, because all of that Wi-Fi traffic would show it. So what we do when we test a device is we determine the test plan. We figure out if we're going to use the radiated or conducted setup. That's we usually use a radiated type setup. That means this. Am I putting information right into my device antenna, or am I setting up an environment? We set up an environment because that's the real way to test. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the intended signal specified in the test plan. So basically, for the set of devices that my device has to coexist with, I'm going to write a test plan and subject my device sequentially to those devices and make sure it functions while monitoring the function of my device. The way I'm going to know what I'm applying to the field, applying to the RF field, is I'm going to have a monitor that sits there and says, this is what your device is seeing. It's not a highly complex test. Testing the actual channel usage of the radio, does my Wi-Fi radio work, is a very, very highly complex test. Well, I'll talk about this 915 radio in a second that I talked about. So I sequentially subject my devices. Now, a lot of times we might do this all at the same time, because testing it one device at a time is not really the real scenario that the device is operating. All these radios are on at the same time. This is what you see here. Basically, this is a diagram saying the device has this spectrum. We're going to inject this amount. We're going to inject this amount of noise with other devices. That's kind of how the test is done. So what you're looking at there is when I said, does the channel work? That's the channel right there. That's the electromagnetic radiation and how the devices in this room pretty much are managing the spectrum at any given time. This has little to do right now with all of the application complexity that we have. Do my devices know who each other device is? Did I hop Wi-Fi networks? Did my RESPI-MON battery die? And that has little to do with the actual usage of the spectrum. Now, the spectrum can degrade. If we all turned on our cell phones right now and we turned on and off the Wi-Fi switch and you saw all of those channels fill up, anybody that's connected to any router around here, their data rate would slow down and come back up. These systems, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, are designed to actually coexist with each other very, very well. The 2.4 gig spectrum that they all operate in is unlicensed, and anybody can do pretty much anything there. We could invent a whole radio scheme right now and put it right here, and as long as we didn't put out too much power, the FCC would go, that's okay. So it's really interesting the way it works. And they've all crept up in these unlicensed bands. 915, so we had this little 915 radio we talked about. We can have naive implementations of a radio protocols that's not very good at managing the spectrum, and then it crashes at the channel level, because all my heart rate straps could all communicate at 915 all at the same time, and they just collision. You can't get a good packet through. So you can see that the testing itself is as much about establishing the use cases and the test environment as it is actually just testing the channel. This is the test. You got your interferers. You got your device, you got an operational distance, you got use case and modes, you have a spectrum monitor, which is that. You have a device which might be a companion device, so I might put the RESPI-MON here and the phone here for this test. I might put them all in the same area. And then I have some monitoring of my device under test just to know it's working. So conceptually, this test, which is, has to do a lot with the channel, is made complicated by the use cases that I could test. Just imagine how many of these I have to set up for the RESPI-MON example. It's pretty complicated. I got to run all different kinds of use cases. I have to have different sets of devices here. I could just put them all there and say they work with all of them, all operating at the same time. And from a justification standpoint, that's worst case scenario. So what time is it right now? Yeah. What time? Good, because I'm running out of material. No. So the channel that you see there, which what used to be there, is all about power, space, frequency, and time. So from an electromagnetic spectrum management, these are the things that the radio is doing. It's saying how much power do I need? How far away am I from something? What frequency am I using? And how am I managing time? Because different radios use time, different radios use frequency. There's lots of different modulation spectra. This we kind of went through already. This we went through already. This I won't do right now, but designing for coexistence. A lot of risk identification. understand the risks associated with your entire system, not just your Wi-Fi radio, but your entire system and how it operates in the context of providing therapy to a patient in an operating room, in a hospital room, in a health club. How is it going to coexist with many other devices? That's the application layer. So this is how well did I write my application. It had nothing to do with the radio. That's the super geek slide there. The media layers are the media layers. If there's, as a programmer, I can use Wi-Fi, and I can use Wi-Fi using a protocol called UDP. I could naively say, I'm going to use Wi-Fi and I'm going to transmit UDP packets. UDP packets are not guaranteed to get where they're going. They may get there, they may not get there. Usually they get there. So if I design my device and I say, I'm going to use UDP because they're fast, in my lab it works 100% of the time because I have one radio sitting there, right? But you get it into an environment like this, everybody turns on their cell phone, UDP, gone, dead. So that's an example of making a choice on a radio that totally works from a coexistence standpoint, but I didn't apply the radio properly to my device. And then you've got the physical layer, which we've kind of talked about, is does my radio actually cooperate with other radios on the spectrum that I'm using? This is what's on that graph. This is Bluetooth, this is Wi-Fi. You can see they're all in the same spot on the channel. They all use the channel at the same time. This is Wi-Fi. Like you might say, oh, I'm only Wi-Fi, so I only need to test a Wi-Fi device. Well, there's Wi-Fi A, B, G, N, A, C, A, D, A, H, A, J, A, X, A, Y, A, Z. Each one of these is a different modulation scheme. If the monitor was on, you could see them. I could tell you who's B, who's G, because I'm so used to looking at that thing. You say there's a G, there's a B. And these are increasingly more modern, and they're increasingly designed to give you more and more bandwidth so that you can stream media to your phone, the main driver. And these are all very different radios. I could say I work Wi-Fi. Well, does that mean you work orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, discrete spread spectrum? So this is another complexity. For each Wi-Fi connection you have this many different radios. These are just like a different radio inside a Wi-Fi radio. So this is an eye chart. Other devices, microwave oven, handheld transceiver. What if I got my Respimon on, I'm exercising, I'm on a treadmill, I'm at the fire station, and I have a 400 megahertz 10-watt radio on my belt? Do I work with a 400 megahertz radio? BLE device, heart rate profile, Bluetooth headset, router, cellular telephone. So how many different cell phones are there? There's a GSM phone, there's a CDMA phone, there's a CDMA phone with Bluetooth capability, there's LTE. So every phone has all these different radios in it. So this is an example of what are the most popular things that any device really has to see out there in the world. So the one advantage is, although you have all these radios out there, most of them are obeying a pretty defined set of standards, which was the key definition of coexistence in the beginning. And when you get into the technology behind radios, cell phones, they're probably the most complex signal processing thing ever to be conceived. That's my opinion. Beside the self-landing rocket. So, best practices. Inclusion of risks and causes in early risk analysis. Consider your radio really early on. Software is the most expensive thing in your device. If you have to rewrite your application protocol to pair with all these devices, it's an expensive problem. You don't want to catch it in a coexistence test. Identification of effective mitigation strategies. Requirements include key decisions and justifications to mitigate risks. Choice of communication system. If you choose a good Wi-Fi, a Bluetooth LE module or Bluetooth module, it's pretty well, you can pretty much be assured that it's going to coexist with other modules for that standard. If you design a proprietary system that's all yours, it's a lot harder, Component selection. does the chosen RF component and its associated software, because I could buy a Wi-Fi module that meets the physical specs where the software inside the Wi-Fi module all of a sudden doesn't work for some reason. Choose the correct communication protocols. We talked about if you pick non-guaranteed message delivery. Advertising versus directed. I can make Bluetooth LE modules just send out advertising packets. The easiest thing to do. The problem is they're not addressed. Every phone in this place that has BTLE turned on would receive that packet. Provisioning should be straightforward. Connecting all these devices should be straightforward. Communication software should be checked and verified and tested. Testing, and I couldn't think of another time. There. Thank you. Laura, you're on.
All right, let's try that. Have you tried turning it on and turning it off again? Yeah, pardon me. So again, thank you to Matter and to Michael. Tough act to follow. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do a demo because, you know, when you hack stuff, the police come. Although we do have a cybersecurity lab within our facility in Northbrook, and it's actually been a really interesting career for me because I am a long-term UL employee. I've worked for UL for about 20 years and started my career, as Michael did, you know, throwing medical devices around and testing them for public safety. However, you know, our organization, like with the healthcare industry, has evolved greatly. And we've evolved and to expand into new areas of innovation. Many of you know that UL has actually started its, you know, 125 plus year business right here, actually on Ohio Street in Chicago. You know, we're kind of a hometown organization, and we really started in this context of new technology and safety. Back in the days of the World Exposition, I wasn't here then, but I heard it was pretty cool. They had this great invention called electric lights, right? You hit the button, and the lights came on, and then what happened? Things started to burn down, buildings started to burn down. One of the things that we began to learn very early on, especially with new innovation like that great thing called the electric lamp, is in fact that electricity, while a great invention, is in fact a potential source of hazard. And through understanding safety science, which UL is a safety science organization, that's how we bill ourselves today. Because while we are, you know, interested definitely in electrical, mechanical, chemical hazards, we also understand that new technology and innovation can in fact cause harm. That harm can be certainly energy or substance, but we'll see in the context of cybersecurity that that harm has actually taken a different shape today. But by being able to eliminate, warn, or guard, we help through the development of standards and even further in our organization by working with customers early on in their design phase to understand the sources of these harms and to be able to help them assure that you can reduce the susceptibility of those harms. In the context of cybersecurity, I think we know today, Michael had a great example, his new invention from yesterday. But that is, in fact, the reality of healthcare ecosystem. Pretty much every device is connected. Is there anyone that's making an electrical mechanical product which is not connected? Very few folks today. This is the state of healthcare. We have the ability to improve healthcare by the collection of data, by the sharing of data, the ability to communicate that data. And Michael's example was a great example of showing how this innovation has, in fact, increased complexity. And is data or software, you know, it's not your typical hazard. It's not like what we know of electricity. It is, in fact, a unique kind of hazard now that's shown up. And, you know, it's the hacker. You know, we call them bad actors. I call them bad guys sometimes. But in essence, we now have a new hazard in the world of cybersecurity. And that hazard is, in fact, that either intentional or unintentional intermediary who, in fact, can instantiate themselves within the data paths of your organization, either through, you know, wireless or wired connection, by connecting things in ways that they shouldn't be connecting, in lots of really fun and different ways that we get to simulate in our laboratory. So, you know, putting a hacker or a bad actor into a risk management, it's kind of, it's a little weird, it's a little different. You know, Michael spoke about a couple of standards that we're going to talk a little bit about today. But really, you know, healthcare, especially in the context of cybersecurity, is very different when we think about risks associated with bad actors. Patient safety is always the paramount goal here. I know that we think about cybersecurity in the context of healthcare oftentimes with privacy and confidentiality, right? Does that, people are, I'm sure you're all very familiar with HIPAA and, you know, what your requirements are there. But what happens if, as a part of gathering that information from that medical device, I inadvertently gather a piece of information that, that is critical in something life-sustaining, or actually has the ability to adulterate something that might lead to an adverse event for a person, either by changing data, by making data unavailable, by corrupting data, either, again, on purpose or inadvertently. What if I, you know, as a part of trying to fuzz into a ventilator, I turn that ventilator off? That's not a good day for somebody who's connected to that ventilator. So we in essence, the most important asset within the context of medical devices is, in fact, that patient safety and all of the things that we think about. So when we work with our customers, we like to kind of talk to them, you know, beyond this notion of privacy and confidentiality, to really understand not only the intended use, but what truly are the assets that you have. And those assets oftentimes go behind what we think of as patient identifying information, patient health information, but is actually the control signals, the data signals, information that might be used for clinical decision, clinical control, operational control of that device. Product risks are very, very different. And I loved your example, Michael, you know, because it was, in fact, simple, and yet it gets exponentially complex because we're connecting things together, oftentimes connecting different manufacturers or heterogeneous type of devices in that entire data chain. And now all of a sudden I have one interface, and then I have two interfaces, and those interfaces have multiple protocols, and those protocols have multiple failure modes. And I'm exchanging data, and I might be exchanging that data, converting it to different data forms. I might have time and asymmetric or timing considerations. I might be able to encrypt it. Now I have encryption, and now the complexity continues to build within this context. So product profiles are very, very diverse. One of the things that we've discovered too is risk analysis, when we take a look at products, actually is a really nice mechanism for understanding what are those assets, the assets beyond just the privacy type of data. What are the signals, control, or data that must always be there? And how do I assure that in the context of my device and its functionality and its connectivity, that information stays confidential, stays available, and stays unadulterated or is integrous? medical IoT and medical health. Again, I think this is an audience that is familiar with really innovating in these spaces. The Internet of Everything. How many folks actually have an appliance at home that's not connected to the Internet? All right. It's a weird question because there's so many of them that are connected to the Internet now, right? I still have a toaster that's just a toaster, right? But I have some other products that, in fact, I have the option of connecting them into my home area network, and do I really want to do that? My thermostat, do I really want to do that? Nice electronic thermostat at home. Well, the Internet of Medical Things. It's a great environment. It's really a cool place. Many of you are innovating in this space. It gives us the ability to provide location services and monitoring remotely. This contraption, do you guys know what this is? What is it? This is a medical device, right? And put my little finger here and take my heart rate, right? I connect it up to my little glucose meter. I put my medical application on it, and I can send my information to my doctor, right? If I'm monitoring things that are chronic. I think you had a great example, Michael. Yeah, this little contraption now went from being just a consumer product, and through innovations has really helped enable a lot of the kinds of solutions that we have today. So medical mHealth devices and automation as well. I've had a chance to chit-chat with some folks and learn about some things that are happening here. Really great stuff. This is going to benefit all of us in the area of healthcare. You guys excited about kind of what's going to happen in the future? Most of you are future thinkers. I think about 10 years from now, you're going to go into the hospital, or you might not even have to go to the hospital, but because of all of the monitoring and the censoring, the hospital will call you and say, I think you need to come in. When you get there, they already know what's wrong with you, and they've got a place situated for you, and you're like, we think you're having some. I'll use you as an example, and I apologize. I don't want to put any bad mojo on you. But right, the different devices, right? But we think you might be having a cardiac event. So once you come into the hospital, we're going to make sure you're taken care of. This is the new world for us, and it's enabled by all these technologies. Does that make you feel cool, or does that scare you a little bit? Yeah, I think it's kind of cool. The Ponemon Institute is a great source of information. They do a lot of research, and they have a lot of good data around this. And the information that they've shared here, I have to put my specs on, but 70% of IoT devices today, based on their research, are susceptible to cybersecurity attacks. Now, if we think about that in the context of the medical IoT, I don't know that statistic is much different. We know that a third to a half of organizations have experienced cybersecurity breaches. We personally, I think the statistic for personal breaches is almost 50% of the population has had in one way, shape, or form either their credit card or their identity or other form of digital information swiped. 50%, I mean, these numbers are really very, very large. In 2018, we're talking about, 2/3 of all networks having not only been breached, but actually maybe having latent malware so that anything that's connected to it then becomes susceptible to that. And those networks are not just within, organizations, corporate networks, but those include things like healthcare information technology networks, which may be, in fact, more susceptible based on the level of security, IoT, and dollars available to leverage that security and safety across these organizations. So we went from being really, happy about these cool inventions that can call us and take care of us. Now we're scared, right? Because now these things are enabled by whole bunches of networks, which, in fact, can possibly be tampered. we've got, not one slide and not 2 slides, but 3 slides of, articles, news articles. It's not difficult to find today a network, a medical device, an organization that has been fined because of breaches. And those breaches, I continue to do research in this area, and our group does, works with both legal firms as well as marketing research organizations to find, what's kind of under the hood, what's the forensics of that. Is this still the Post-it note password on the keyboard? Many of you know, if you flip the keyboard over, and what's the most popular password? Password 1, 2, 3, yeah, and sharing of passwords. But more and more so, we're finding that it's not just, we're beginning to become more and more sophisticated by changing some of those general practices, those human practices. And it is, in fact, coming from hackers that are able to use backdoors into organizations, either through devices that are on those networks, or just by virtue of actually being able to do reconnaissance and penetrate networks themselves. So unfortunately, we are in a kind of a situation where I think we all realize that cybersecurity in the context of medical devices is in fact real. It's a very, very high concern. And again, I think we're seeing more and more so, Michael brought up some of that. I'm going to talk in more detail about some of the regulatory changes that have occurred over the last couple of years, specifically with the FDA. And I had the pleasure of talking at a conference with Suzanne Schwartz from the Center for CDRH. And she and her colleagues are our primary contacts when we talk about cybersecurity and when we work with the FDA on behalf of our customers. And one of the myths, and she dispelled at this conference, was, in fact, that the cybersecurity of medical devices is voluntary. And in fact, it is not. For new submissions, according to the guidance today, medical device manufacturers are required by law. And just because we know that these guidances, medical guidances, are in fact not legally binding, the FDA says the guidance gives you the information that you need, but medical device manufacturers are required by law to comply with all applicable regulations, including those of the QSRs. For both pre-market and post-market cybersecurity guidances, these documents, in fact, articulate what we mean for manufacturers to, in fact, be in compliance with the law. Let's take a look at those. And it does, in fact, reinforce some of the early conversations that I've heard from the FDA. And I'm beginning to see more and more regulators across the world adopt the regulations very, very similar to what the FDA has, in fact, published. So I've seen them both in China as well as Japan. For those of you who are actually, developing products globally, Europe has one of the more stringent privacy directives. That's another directive, and though it's not specific to medical devices, it applies to all commercial products, and it has very specific protections for personal data and what you can and cannot do with that, which is really important to understand as well as you're working in this environment and you're connecting products up to these networks that is going to move this data around for the purpose of improving healthcare. But let's talk about, kind of what's under the hood for that. Within the FDA guidance for pre-market submissions, the FDA is expecting manufacturers to perform risk management around those assets that are contained in medical devices which are connectable. And connectable means any type of network connectivity, be it a wireless radio, be it network, internet connection of sorts, the ability to connect to, I'm trying to think, some other kind of connectivity. I think the standard HIT type connectivity is EOL basic Ethernet jack. But the idea here is that risk management around any of the assets that you would have in that device that would need to be protected in order to assure the confidentiality, availability, and integrity of the intended use and of the patient health information on that device. The core functions from the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's a great set of standards, a very comprehensive set of standards that NIST has, and there's special publications around cybersecurity. But the ability to identify potential threats, to protect against them, to detect, respond, and in fact recover from those. And that's a lot. And in the context of a network, the ability to understand if a network is in fact compromised, how does that translate to a medical device, though? That seems like a lot of overhead one has to put into medical device design, and we'll talk about that a little later. There's very specific information about how you document your approach to cybersecurity. And Michael talked about some of the documentation in the context of coexistence. And again, this is not much different for cybersecurity. What are your assets? You have protected health information. Is that health information encrypted? What information is it? What do you do with that information? Do you can you control your device remotely? Do you have a mobile app that in fact can send signals to and from or receive information from that? How is that being transmitted? Is that Wi-Fi? Is that Bluetooth? So the ability to actually understand, articulate the assets, the data flows, and what happens should that information in fact become, and I use the term adulterated, and it's kind of an interesting term because it's a classic medical device term, but we can use that also in the context of data. That data's not right. So, and again, just if you thought, well, I'm not going to submit anything to the FDA, you guys are kind of in that early stage, so you'll have that engagement. But even for folks that are submitting, I'm going to move ahead a little bit, even for folks that are mature companies that have products in the field today, the requirements around cybersecurity, they're post-market expectations. And the ability for manufacturers to scan, to understand if there are new zero-day vulnerabilities identified, to be able to analyze those vulnerabilities and whether or not they may be present in their device, and then the ability to contact the folks who own those devices and to be able to effect patch and patch management is an expectation of the FDA for manufacturers who have products in the field that are in fact connectable in nature and have a potential or can potentially be hacked into. I mean, it's as simple as that. Talk a little bit then about how you do risk analysis for cybersecurity. Because risk analysis is a little bit different. We've kind of talked about, I think this, we think of this as a three-legged stool. Confidentiality. A lot of folks go, I don't have any health information. Well, even if you don't have patient identifying information, what happens if you're collecting anonymized health information and you're using that in order to either diagnose, possibly provide drug information that can help doctors make clinical decisions. You may have information in there that may turn a device on and off, a control signal. These are all actually assets within your product where the integrity and availability is actually very important. I would recommend, too, taking my engineer hat off and put my business hat on, that you also can consider the risk management and really your goals around your financial brand reputation and understanding regulatory process as well. If you are involved in a breach, God forbid, you can in fact expect there to be potential regulatory implications for that. If you have products in the field today, and again, when working with mature companies that have products in the field, upon an inspection, it's likely that your FDA inspector might ask you around your monitoring of events in the field. So it now then becomes one of those things that as a part of your regular FDA inspections as you have those, because the guidance is in place now for post-market, they may come in and ask you, who's responsible for monitoring new vulnerabilities and analyzing whether or not those vulnerabilities will affect your product, even if they're in open source software that you may or may not have in your product. So these are new processes that need to be in place as a part of some of this changing landscape for cybersecurity. And the threats are different. Remember, we might have a flaw. You might actually have a software weakness, due to, just either in a third-party piece of software that you've incorporated within your product, or unfortunately, and I can make fun of software people because I'm a software person. But yeah, code it's a very complex design process. On occasions, you can in fact put weaknesses into your products that you don't realize that are there. Those weaknesses by themselves, it's not necessarily going to manifest into a vulnerability. However, if you have the opportunity and you have the threat, medical assets are actually one of the most lucrative assets that cybersecurity folks can go after. They command the highest price per record, kind of out there in the deep web. And if you have a medical device or your device is connectable, you are automatically a good threat surface for a bad actor. And who might that bad actor be? It's interesting. Let's talk about the kill chain of an attack. The recon. How do hackers go about looking for the ability to get into your product? Well, it's through this connectivity, through the ability to exploit those weaknesses in your product. And once they find them, they decide, well, how can I in fact exploit that? How can I weaponize something, or I can create a payload that I can actually put into the device that allows me to do my final, what's my goal? And maybe my goal is to use your product to pivot in to the rest of the network, or maybe to steal information out. Or if you're watching TV at night, maybe I'm trying to hack into your pacemaker in order to turn it off for some nefarious reason. I have the ability then, if I can actually get access and authenticate it, to deliver and in fact exploit that vulnerability in your system, install it, and ultimately take control and maintain control. Another study, I wish I had a good reference for you, but shows that many vulnerabilities in networks have been there for over 3 years. And some is up as long as 5 years. That they have actually been in place and have not been exploited until such time that somebody goes, hey, you know what? I forgot. We had that really cool back door there. Hey, let's see what's going on. Let's see if we can find it. And there's great tools out there like Shodan that make that really interesting. You guys know, are you familiar with Shodan? Anybody? Go on to, Michael, you and I were having fun with that one day. Let's go on to Shodan.com and see if you can hack into my Echo. So it's a website that provides you with all of the devices that are connected to the internet. And you can actually go in there and perform searches on it. So I can go in there and go, anesthesia machines or Amazon Echoes. And I can actually get a list of those out. And then I go, well, I wonder what this one is over there. Don't do this at home, guys. If you hack them, it's against the law. And I have to say that a couple, 2 or 3 times, because it's really, really, for those of us who do this for a living, it's really fun to do. We do it in controlled circumstances. I have a lot of computers at home that don't work anymore because I've successfully hacked them and killed them. So don't lend me a computer if I ask to borrow one. But anyway, the idea here is the way cybersecurity risks and breaches actually occur are very difficult to translate into that classic ISO 14971 risk management that I think most of the folks who work in medical are familiar with. It actually takes looking at it from kind of a different perspective. What are your assets? And who are the bad guys? Most of the time, they're not going to be, nation states. But I think we recognized in the healthcare industry, and if you don't recognize if this is the only thing you take away from today's talk, is really that understanding that when you make a connected medical device and you have the ability to connect into electronic health records and medical records, to connect to hospital information technology systems, you are in fact creating products that enable criminals to get at assets that are really valuable. Probably the most valuable out there beyond credit cards, beyond just social security numbers. And there's lots and lots of cases where people have had their medical insurance records hacked and they didn't know it, and people have had procedures that were done at different hospitals and paid for by your insurance. We can talk, if you're interested in hearing some of those fun stories, we'll have a break here. What are the adversaries' goal? In many cases, it's really to get to that personal health information. But in the process of doing that, they might also affect the functionality of your product. So what happens is somebody is trying to fuzz into your device, and it's on a network, and that device inadvertently hangs up because they're trying to send information which looks like it's legitimate, but it's not quite legitimate, and it actually stalls your product. Well, that's probably okay if it's quiescent and it's like a thermometer, but it's probably not okay if it's an infusion pump or a ventilator, an anesthesia machine, or something else that might be relied upon for continued operation. What are their resources? That used to be a bigger question, but today, boy, I tell you, this stuff is really easy to get to. And I have an app on my phone that I can sit in the room and I can sniff around. Actually, Michael, you were the one who pointed me to this one. You got to watch out for these guys. Yeah, you did. It's and I do it all the time now. Bluetooth LE. What kind of devices are on Bluetooth LE? What's that? Oh, somebody's got a cell phone over here. Hi, Sally's cell phone. Yeah, these tools for the ability to actually get into devices that are wireless are actually a lot easier to get today. You can go on the internet. Again, I don't recommend this unless you can hide your IP address. But go in there and find, Bluetooth hacking tools. There are a lot of these tools that we actually use in our laboratory as a part of our penetration testing schema for that. But they're available, and a lot of them are free. And it's just somebody with a little bit of creativity and time and interest in doing that. You don't need a lot of resources today in order to hack in the products. And the motives, again, monetary motives. People are getting these assets and they're selling them, and it's good business. Threat modeling, there's a lot of different kinds of threat modeling that you can use to understand how medical devices can, in fact, be compromised. We talked about your general risk management, but Michael spoke about a standard, the AMI TRR 57, which I think is a really great standard. It is a standard that speaks in the language of ISO 14971, but translates how one does risk analysis into that context of security. And it is, as we go and talk a little bit more about UL 2900, it is one that we in fact reference because it's one of the very first standards that talks about how one does risk management for medical devices and puts it in a language and a context that I think is actually really easily incorporated into traditional risk management processes. NIST has a number of special publications. There's different frameworks that you can use. But again, my belief is if you are, you don't need to change up the way you do risk management, but understanding how products, how networks can in fact be compromised, and what's the language of that, and by reading a few of these standards would be a really great place to start for organizations who need to understand how to address cybersecurity for their devices. Designing for security, we can spend a lot of time designing for security. This is where I'd like to introduce the standard UL 2900. It is in fact a testable standard, but it includes 3 different types of requirements for medical device cybersecurity, or I should say cybersecurity of connected products. Because the UL 2900 standard wasn't written specifically for medical devices, is in fact can be broadly applied across industry. However, we at UL recognize that there's a couple of industries that are in fact leading the area for cybersecurity, that being of industrial controls and for medical devices. And so we've written very specific particular standards for those two industries. And I'm going to talk a bit about what's in these standards. I'll go through it pretty quickly, but if you're interested, by all means, we can chat a little after today. But the idea, there's so many standards out there. The NIST framework has a lot of standards. There's common criteria. There's IC standards, ISO standards. But one of the things that our organization recognized was, but while these standards have a lot of what things you ought to consider, they didn't have anything that was testable. There was no testable criteria. How do you know I've implemented authorization in a way that works? And so our organization took the approach of looking at what are the minimum set of process activities, design activities, and testing that one needs to create a very strong baseline of objective evidence that you've in fact addressed cybersecurity in a way that was meaningful and provable for your medical devices. Kind of went back to last administration when President Obama was signing a lot of executive orders around protecting the national infrastructure, critical infrastructures including healthcare. And at that time, the cybersecurity czar, I'm not sure what his official title is, but that's a cool title. I would take that one, right? Michael Daniel was his name, and in an interview, I think it actually showed up in Wired magazine, he said, wouldn't it be cool if there was a cyber UL, or a UL for cyber? And of course, we at UL went, yeah, that would be cool. And we talked early on about, we're a safety science organization. We've taken on a lot of new types of innovation. Let's sit down and see if we can, in fact, approach cybersecurity from that same safety science thinking. And actually, we engaged in a number of stakeholders, including folks at the Department of Homeland Security, the folks through the ICS CERT team who do a lot of the emergency response around current industrial controls and energy breaches. The FDA was at the table with us, a number of private, public and private, academic as well as manufacturers who are in both industrial control, appliance, consumer type space and medical spaces. And we got together and we put together a set of standards. Many of you, read standards, IC standards, ISO standards. Yeah, you like them? I come from UL. I tell my friends to take them on vacations, that they're really good to take on vacations. Anybody going on vacation and need a copy of UL 2900? It's really good for beach, and it goes nicely like with a beer. So, standards development takes a long time. For those of you have you ever participated in an IC or an ANSI standard process? They take years and years to develop. It's very much like creating laws in the U.S. And part of what UL was being asked directly from the Department of Homeland Security is, guys, we just don't have 3 or 4 years. 3 or 4 years, the bad guys will be a lot smarter, and we're not going to be any farther down this road. Can you quickly develop a standard based on input, based on current standards today? And that's exactly what we did. We published the first edition of UL 2900 in March of last year, so it's about a year old, very, very quickly, in fact. We are now on a second edition based on some comments, and currently, and again, we've leveraged a lot of good input from the industry, from manufacturers, from security organizations, from government officials, regulators as well. And we are currently now have taken that document to the ANSI standards process, which is the slow process. Although it is moving a lot faster than what, and I think we're excited because we do believe that by this year we are in fact going to have one of the very first ANSI standards for cybersecurity, a testable standard for cybersecurity. So I'm excited about that, having been one of those people who's been participating on that. So we are anticipating that. Although the standard does exist today as a UL standard, we call it an outline of investigation, and we do in fact provide testing and certification, and it can become a basis for design, process, and testing criteria if your organizations have interest in building a cybersecurity program within your companies. It does have a base standard, as we said. When we developed it, we said this can't just be for one industry. Because let's face it, Bluetooth stack's a Bluetooth stack. Doesn't matter what kind of product you put it in, right? If you have 802.11, it's really 802.11. It doesn't matter if it's in a cell phone or if it's in a printer. These technologies are very similar, and they're implemented in similar ways. And you hack into them the same way. So our laboratory is actually an enterprise laboratory across all of our business units at UL. And we serve both commercial, industrial, consumer, as well as the medical industry. So we do have a base standard. But as we spoke before, we've created two what we call particular standards that are very specific for healthcare and for industrial controls. And part of the reason for doing that is because your industry, the healthcare medical industry, in vitro diagnostic industry, already has some pretty good standards for quality management, for risk management, for software development, and it wasn't our intent to ignore those standards. What we wanted to do was to create a standard that actually interleaved and leveraged those processes and those requirements and showed organizations how, in fact, to apply them to cybersecurity. We are currently looking at a couple of different industries. Here's a good quiz. I wish I had a really good prize. Could we give them your invention, Michael? Somebody gets this answer right? Royalties? Okay. Who do you think would be the next industry interested in a cybersecurity, a specific cybersecurity standard? Automotive. Woohoo! Yeah, we're working very closely with the automotive industry. Why and why? You're scared? You got a Jeep? Yeah, I think we've seen the automotive industry, and cars have been getting hacked into. Do you have a Jeep? No, okay. Yeah, so building and life safety technologies, HVAC, lighting, and automotive as well. Okay, you get a free visit to the UL Cybersecurity Lab. We do have general process requirements as well, how to extend things, and we're building those standards right now. Those would be specifically for agencies such as orthogonal, who would like to be able to demonstrate, we're a design organization. We have secure development lifecycle processes. We have the ability, to develop secure type of devices very specifically for the process around that as well. So we're continuing to evolve these requirements and expect to have a very good, very strong body of knowledge in this area as well. I'm going to kind of move past this just to be cognizant of time here. A few more minutes. This is what's contained in the UL 2900-1 standard. We've got, like all things, you never get out of the project without the paperwork. So there are very specific documentation requirements for manufacturers who are developing products that are connectable and thus, have vulnerabilities in them. Documentation for product use. Your products are actually going to be owned by organizations that will connect them into their networks. So what information do you need to send downstream? In the case of medical devices, we have found that if I have a medical device connected to a computer and there's an accessory software on it, but that computer is running a virus scanner, that virus scanner has in fact turned that medical device off. See? That was really good timing, wasn't it? Plan that. It's in there. I got it memorized. I took good on my last vacation. So there's design requirements as well. Some of the design requirements around authentication, access and authentication. You know, that's just a cybersecurity nerdy word for passwords. And when I'm actually communicating along networks, if I'm sending information from the network into the product, what mechanism does that product have to know that that information coming in is in fact from a source that's authorized and is information which is in fact authenticated to be read into the device, right? I don't want to take any information in because this is oftentimes how bad actors hack into your product. They try to send messages in, and those messages I think somebody hacked us. Talking. Is this thing on? There are requirements around encryption, design requirements. So if you in fact have patient identifying or patient health information in the context of medical devices, the FIPS 140-2 standard for cryptographic verification is a standard that's very well recognized by the VA, by the DoD. It is in fact a standard that manufacturers can have their products evaluated, or even third-party components such as operating systems, Bluetooth. You may use wireless encryption like AES encryption methodologies as well. So there are very specific design requirements around you know, having encrypted information so that that information, should your product actually become part of a cybersecurity attack, you have what we call layers of defense, levels of defense within the actual system itself. The process requirements include things like, how do you qualify your software developers? Do you vet them? Do you do background checks? What about your supply chain? Many of you are familiar, and not recently with the Mirai bot, but many moons ago, a number of home routers were infected with malware. You guys remember that? Yeah, that was done as a part of the supply chain. That was not something that the manufacturers actually designed into the product. But that's kind of a cool feature if you're trying to spy on folks. But is in fact introduced by virtue of replication of software, manufacturing process. So as a part of those process requirements, how do you qualify your vendors? How do you vet your vendors? What kind of practices do your vendors have for protecting your software if they are in fact designing, building your printed circuit boards, if they're programming your microprocessors, if they're hosting your software? We talked about cloud services. What kind of mechanisms do those cloud service providers have in the event that they find that they're breached? And by the way, you have patient identifying information in that cloud and they've been breached. What's the mechanism? Because you as an organization will need to have service level agreements in place for that. So our standard takes into consideration requirements like that. And last but not least, we have tests that we will perform on the product, and that there are very specific criteria for go, no-go. I guess I want to kind of qualify that. And one of the, really just the tenets, the DNA of our business is that our safety standards, traditional standards like IEC 60601, we call those a baseline set of requirements. Many manufacturers will actually design above that set of requirements. They will put in reliability types of requirements, things that the 60601 standard probably doesn't have it, well, doesn't have in it. And that's the same thing for UL 2900. You may actually design your product above and beyond the types of requirements that are in there. You may decide that you are going to have multiple levels of defense. But at a very minimum, what our organization looks at, hey, look at that. I'm over here, sort of. Is that we're going to evaluate your product for weaknesses, software weaknesses specifically to the CWEs, top 25 CWEs. So we'll run static code analysis, byte code and binary analysis to see if you have weaknesses which are known to be exploitable. We will understand exactly what those risk controls are, because we will evaluate your hazard analysis for security. And we're going to know just exactly what risk controls you put into place. And we're going to do structured penetration testing. This is a little bit different than just handing a security person, hey, pen test my box for me, which is what is considered black box testing. And that's a lot of fun, right? You sit down, you hack in, you connect in, you see what's going on. You try to run, a couple of scans, you nmap what's they're talking about. You go, hey, look at this. Okay, I got that information. I know what OS is there. Let me read the documents. Oh, they're running on this. Oh, I know. Let me see if I can exploit that known vulnerability. And that's black box testing. And it's kind of open-ended. We actually do what's called white box penetration testing. So we take your risk controls and we actually try to penetrate them, knowing how you've implemented them. We try to crack your passwords. We try to actually go in and break your encryption methodologies. And last but not least, we do fuzzing. So fuzzing is a technique. It's a malformed input. We will connect your product up into a network. And let's say it's, you're using your standard, IP6. We're going to just send messages into that box. We're going to send, and those messages are going to be malformed in a very slight way. So they look authentic, but they're actually not. And as a part of doing this, and we do it a million times, a million different messages, to see how the box responds. And again, that's a technique that demonstrates the robustness. We have very specific criteria for when that product, in fact, passes and fails. Be conscientious of our time here. I got about 5 minutes left. Is that right? Right, I'm going to go through these. I want to show you how the specific cybersecurity standard for medical devices is a hint different. And what's different about it is, we understand that there are specific requirements around product documentation. And so we actually do tune it to be very specific around the kinds of language, responsible organizations, healthcare IT information. We understand that ISO 14971 is in fact the standard for medical device risk management. And so our risk management processes are linked to that standard, as well as to the AMI TIR 57, which is also normatively referenced. Some of the known vulnerability testing that we do, again, the input testing and the structured pen testing is very specifically tuned around trying to crack into protected health, PII, PHI, and other functional assets that are associated with the intended use of your product. And that's very important because we know that intended use, indications for use, tell us exactly how your products are medically indicated. And what we're looking at specifically is, can we, as a part of our cybersecurity investigation, can we, as part of our hacking your product, to be, kind of just simple, can I, in fact, go in and cause a circumstance that would be unacceptable risk with the user or the patient? So we're very specific around that as well. Our life cycle security processes leverage ISO 13485. And so the kinds of requirements that medical device companies must comply with both in Europe and the QSRs, we take those and extend those for security. And so you know that you do have to do supply chain, right? You have training. You've got to maintain training records. You have to qualify folks who are actually performing those design processes. So we extend those and say, how do I do that in the context of security? I have lots of really groovy slides. I think, Michael, you called them groovy, right? That talks about a lot of the things that I talked through when we were kind of in zero dark 30 mode. I'm going to go through these really fast. I believe that you'll be making these available to the participants, so you'll have a lot of this information in place. Are you comfortable with the language around cybersecurity? I've been using a lot of that. I've used the term vulnerability, weakness, exploit. They have very specific meaning in the context of security. And a weakness is some kind of flaw, a mistake or a flaw in the actual architecture or the design, oftentimes in the software, but it might also be actually at the device, the physical device itself. And a weakness is something that actually can be exploitable. It's a flaw in your software that, for example, you don't have strong passwords. Or when you, in fact, authenticate, you don't time your sessions out. And so, right, when we log in, you know, our phones do this all the time. They log us off, right? So in case somebody decides to come in, if you open up, for example, if you open up a port for communication, when that communication is done, you have mechanisms in there to make sure that those ports are closed when they're done, so somebody can't just come around going, hey, look at this open port, let's see what's going on there. Because that's exactly what they do. A bunch of teenagers sitting around with nothing better to do, right? An exploit is actually the ability to take advantage of that weaknesses and exploit the vulnerability in a way that could bring negative consequences. This is language, again, that's very common within the NIST standards, within the cybersecurity world. It's a little bit weird for just medical devices because it is security related, but we adopt a lot of this language. We talked about common weakness enumeration. There are actually public databases available that you can go to today, supported by MITRE. There's interesting stuff going on around there, but they are in fact cwe.mitre.org. You can go online and you can see very specific weakness enumeration. What are they? Where are they present? How are they in fact exploitable? How do you fix them? And in the process of doing that, you have the ability, sneaky, to go through. I'm going to move through some of this pretty quickly, and I apologize for that. By all means, I'll leave my cards if you'd like to. If you have questions about this, feel free to give myself a call. I have some colleagues here. We can chat afterwards as well. I talk about this stuff forever, but I would like to leave you with a couple of best practices, things to think of. If you're very early on in the process here, it's really important, if you're in your early design phase, to understand what we call the cybersecurity posture of your device. What assets do you have? What do you intend to do with that assets? Are you connected? How are you connecting? What are you sending? What are you receiving? What are the things that could happen if that doesn't occur? Is your product hackable? What happens if somebody gets in and hacks your product? Understand that your product can be used as a pivot point into a healthcare IT organization. Who are you selling to? What kind of evidence are they going to be interested in? I think we talked about the FDA. Your regulators are going to want to have objective evidence that you've in fact addressed this. Expand your risk management processes early to identify, to understand how your products are exploitable, and to be able to build in risk controls early. We work with a lot of customers, both in early stages of innovation, but who have mature products out, and it's extremely difficult to go back because you can't Band-Aid on. You end up redesigning your products. It's very, very difficult and very expensive. So understand what risk controls you need early on and put them into your design phases. Research your third-party software. Quick to market is great, and leveraging third-party off-the-shelf soup in the language of software lifecycle for medical devices is great, and everybody does it. But you are still responsible for the weaknesses that show up in those, and there are many. And you can actually go to the CWE and CVE websites and research those because they are in many cases known. Make sure that your supply chain, evaluate your supply chain. And this includes those software folks who are developing code. I'm sorry, I'm going to pick on your software developers. Because if you are, in fact, developing software through third-party folks, it's important to understand, to vet them. If you go back and you read about Berkeley Unix and all those great Berkeley software engineers that developed the Unix operating system, they left a lot of really cool Easter eggs and hatches and backdoors and stuff in there. And that industry was taking care of it. And this dates me, right? What is that, 80-something? Software developers do that. I'm sorry, but they do. And those bad actors can also be inside your house. So vet your third-party folks and your supply chain. Consider a broader cybersecurity testing plan. A lot of folks pen test their products and they think that's all you need to do. We advocate a little bit more robust cybersecurity testing to include software, bytecode, binary code, static analysis, fuzzing, white box penetration, structured penetration testing, not just black box penetration testing. And find a way to get connected to bodies of knowledge for cybersecurity so you know what's happening in the industry, so that you know the kinds of regulatory events that are occurring with people who've been around the block, and there are some out there, but that you also understand how many folks know about Heartbleed. Heartbleed, yeah, it was a virus in open source software. There will be another one. I can guarantee it. Another one and another one, and one might show up in software that you might be employing for your products, especially in this area of connectivity, because this is exactly where the bad guys want to be. They want to be able to penetrate networks. They don't really care what it's connected to, because it's always connected to something good on the other end. So that's kind of our takeaway. I appreciate your attention and the time here. And from there, I think I'm only about 2 minutes over. Right? 3 minutes? 8 minutes? Thank you, everyone. I appreciate it.
For us. test. One.
Sure.
Okay, where's Laura?
I'm right here. I'm here, Michael.
Where do you want to sit, Laura?
You're behind the
Oh, I'm good.
Here or here, whichever you want.
All right.
Okay, so first of all, thanks for staying for the panel. Appreciate that. And so the questions here can be actually outside of what we talked about in terms of anything related to connected health, I think we can field here. Certainly any questions related to the technologies, but I want to do one thing. As you've heard a lot from Laura and I'd like Bernhard to introduce himself and Orthogonal.
So I'm Bernhard Keppe. I'm CEO of Orthogonal, and we're actually a member company here. I think we're the largest tenant at Matter. If you look at that first case study or example that Michael mentioned, where you have this device and then now it's connected to a mobile app and then back up in the cloud, potentially doing updates over the air, that side of things, that's what we do. So most of what we do is we build connected care systems or companion software for medical devices. And those are either accessories or part of a Class 2 FDA submission, or in some cases they're separate Class 2 medical. So everything from diabetes to heart monitoring to neurostimulation devices. We work together with Michael on a few things, and hopefully with UL on a few things as well in the future.
Okay, so the cloud has presented us with a question. And it's to you, Laura. Do cybersecurity risks go beyond internet/network connections? What about exposed wired ports on a medical device?
Great question. And how we would approach working with a customer, any interface, any external interface that can be used as a mechanism to gain information can be a part of, can be in scope. So if you have a USB port on your product and it's intended to be connected to a printer, or maybe it's intended, if you have a USB port inside the product or a JTAG on the board that you actually leave open, these are oftentimes potential interfaces where you can, in fact, get into a product. So we'll work with a customer and determine the appropriate scope based on what their interest is. If they've decided to put like software switches in on that JTAG port and want to make sure that that's not compromisable, we can go in and actually do that testing. A lot of times, though, we work just with the periphery of the device, and any connection that I can tap into that allows me to send information in or possibly sniff information
out. Right, much like Stuxnet, Stuxnet, the famous virus, USB injected. Okay. Any questions from the audience? Dan.
Along the same lines, how about social engineering? Kevin Mitnick wrote the book in 2001 about
Do you want to take? I can take if you like. So yes, in fact, especially on the system and software side, that's a huge part of it. And a lot of when we are doing architectural reviews and then operational reviews of the system, we have to look at those things. Both, what can happen if a patient, a clinician, or an operator of the system, or a manager or administrator of the system is compromised or hacked. In some cases, those can be really severe if it's an administrator of the system. So, some of it is basic hygiene, and there are best practices around that in terms of password and authentication, et cetera. But that's the weakest link almost always in a system.
Yeah, our standard does not look at those types of, I guess we call it side channel or side chain attack, because we're looking very specifically at But I agree with you that that is an important element, and it could be where, as a part of your threat modeling, you would want to consider that, especially if you have a larger system and you're using different levels of software, and you have software which would be resident on a PC. What are the things you need to consider?
A lot of cases, what we are seeing is, it's cheaper and easier to do heavy-duty processing off of the device for certain types of things, but now you have potentially medical device risk in a mobile app, in the cloud, et cetera. So now those themselves are potentially the same classification as the device, or are themselves separate medical devices. So that has to be taken into consideration. Now you have a medical device, software as a medical device in the cloud, another set of things you have to consider.
Right. One of the movements now that you see in many cybersecurity sensitive applications is multi-factor authentication. You don't really, it's really hard to figure out in a clinical setting how to create multi-factor authentication. But you could envision, using Bluetooth LE tags, RFID, for doing proximity-based two-factor authentication. In other words, if somebody's trying to get into a device and that person's not standing next to that device, you're not getting into that device. Dropbox, Dropbox, you can turn on two-factor authentication. If you want to sign into your Dropbox account, you got to answer a text on your phone. But the use cases around that and how to do that have not really been figured out and extended to IoT devices. A complex problem. Okay, next question here. From the cloud again. Laura, you're popular on the cloud today. Are combination products, those that include more than one regulated component, more likely to face cybersecurity issues?
Tough question, and obviously it depends. Combination products, I assume, from the question, we're talking about drug device.
Yeah, more than one regulated component. So,
I don't know that I know the answer to that. I think from a submission perspective, you would be expected to have the same type of cybersecurity evidence that you've designed. If it is in fact connected.
Yeah, I think anytime you have a more complex system with more potential interfaces between the subsystems that are, in some way could be available to someone, you have more risks that you have to at least look at and take into consideration. So probably, but there's also more power in those systems.
Yeah, and I would suggest, doing a threat model around it. What are the assets? What do you get from those assets? What information is being provided? Look at it from an attractiveness perspective and a threat modeling perspective. That would be
right. And as we know, one port is enough to get into a system. So cybersecurity issues, look at the tornado alarms in Texas. They set off 150 of them at the same time at 10:34 at night or something like that the other day. One port somewhere, somebody sniffed it out.
I think some of it is also the severity of what can happen. So if you compare, a blood glucose monitor to an artificial pancreas, right? Okay, you've got a number of different things that are communicating. In the latter case, it's more complex. It's not necessarily the complexity. It's what happens when that system breaks down. Kill someone more easily in that case than with just the glucose monitor.
And to your example of one port, that's how Target point of sale system was in fact compromised, was through a port, if I understand, in the HVAC system. And there were no protections. That's another one that's been analyzed, and so go home and Google it, and you'll learn about the forensics of that. One port, and all of our credit cards got nabbed.
Right. There was a pacemaker hack not long ago where there was actually ransom involved. I won't go into that whole story. You can find that on Google. But they had hacked into a pacemaker, and what they did is they didn't really expose the internals of the pacemaker. What they figured out is they could ping the pacemaker and keep it on in its communication mode and wear down the battery. That, of course, is a problem on a pacemaker, right? So you could get it, somebody could take and put something outside your home and wear down your pacemaker battery. That was, I think, two years ago. Single port, not even really, they didn't really, lock pick their way into the processor registers or anything. All they did was keep the thing on. That's all they did.
That kind of thing can happen inadvertently as well. I think you and I were speaking earlier about that example that you had where you had continuous monitoring and you're pulling data up. If you're not managing that, you could be in this, and you have a breakdown, and now you have data stored up in a limited pipe, and it keeps breaking down because of issues on either end. You could be continuously wearing down the battery because you're continuously trying to connect and pull data, and you can't pull the data, and instead of a small periodic thing, it turns into a big cluster.
We're going to speed this thing up here because the cloud's active. I'm sure. Next question out here.
The FDA guidance suggests that you should be involved in an ISAO group, and I believe they state, I don't remember the language, that if you are a member of such a group, then they're going to be maybe less stringent on your post-market. I'm curious about the motivation. I can see that being good, but it seems odd that they would suggest that so strongly when I believe those organizations just aren't that mature right now. So your comment on that.
That's an interesting observation, and there are a few. There is a National Healthcare NHISAC that has actually been initiated, for which part of our technical staff participates. But there are other ISAOs available. For example, the Industrial Controls ISAC is available. It is actually more mature. And as we had kind of talked about earlier, understanding cybersecurity threats is not necessarily an industry-specific kind of thing. Now, granted, there are incidences that occur within the medical environment which you get access to if you're in an industry-specific area. However, becoming part of an information-sharing organization and having early warning is essential in being able to kind of shut down the potential for having your devices compromised. One of the aspects of an ISAO or an ISAC is that oftentimes you're getting early warning. You're getting advanced information around 0 days that is not publicly available. And that is part of the rules around many of these ISAC and information sharing organizations. So it's an early warning system, and part of the reason for suggesting that is so that we can get ahead of the bad guys. Because once a vulnerability has actually been published, it's now available for anyone who's trolling to look for, a vulnerability to exploit. Once it's published and it's known, then all of our friends, on the dark web, are passing around how-to plans for exploiting that. So I think that might be, again, part of the reason for recommending that very strongly. It's not mandatory, as you've identified. It is something that reduces the burden for manufacturers by participating in that, kind of get the benefit of post-marketing burden and having to submit, incidences to the FDA. But it is a great opportunity, I think. And there are more organizations out there than just within the national healthcare space that you may be able to tune into.
Okay, another question from the room. I'm going to go faster because there's piling up. Another question from the room, anybody? Dan.
How do you draw the balance between usability and protection?
Excellent question. I mean, ultimately, you know, the FDA says risk management first, what's acceptable risk, and you have to, you know, it's a judgment call, honestly. So you have to start with risk, but then, you know, you have to come up with ways that you can get usability within that and test that kind of thing. So no easy answer. Sure. Correct.
Right, and our standard has a clause in it that says for those products that need to have accessibility under emergent conditions, you have to have a break the glass mode. And I agree that that's a tough question in the hospital domain. To me, that would be an interesting subject for an early engagement, like a pre-sub meeting with the FDA, on how to strike that balance in your design.
I think it's even, you know, if something is in patients' hands, that is even more critical because you can't rely on training as much. There's a whole bunch of other things there. So, and in a lot of cases, it's not going to get used, and so it may be effective when used, but if it doesn't get used, you're not going to have, you know, a product that works on it.
Okay, here is the toughest question from the web right now, top voted. Who does connected devices well? Who is ahead of the game in figuring out applications and development of them? Apple.
But not in the med space so much, right? So I'll tell you one company that's, that I think is pretty far ahead is a company called ResMed out of San Diego. They have CPAP machines, and they've been connected for quite some time, and they have about 200 people in their digital group, and they're pulling lots of data and getting lots of effectiveness out of this. So tons of lessons learned that they've had in the space. I think, you know, people where they are, they're on the forefront of where the rubber hits the road, in terms of financial changes to the market. Those are folks that are well ahead, I think. There's some startups that are doing really cool things. I can mention a company called Propeller Health that is up out of Madison that is doing things in the asthma space. They have lots of lessons learned in terms of combining different data sources and then measuring patient engagement around asthma, connecting in with devices and getting learnings out of that. But a lot of people are in the early stages still, frankly.
Room question.
Question around data privacy and data residency. And you mentioned about how Europe has a lot more stringent requirements around data privacy. You just used the example of ResMed. So how is data and data privacy handled, or is there an evolution going on in that space in terms of standardization?
I wouldn't say standardization necessarily. I don't know if you have thoughts here, but I think, you know, there are, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of similarities to personal financial information, right? How that is being handled. You know, you want to again isolate. You want access to different types of data. You want to isolate different data sets from each other. You want to encrypt it at rest. You want to de-identify it as much as possible. All kind of, you know, best practices. I don't know that there is a you know, a standard so much from that perspective. It's still evolving. There are things that we don't even know yet that we're going to be doing with that data. So some of those are new cases that we're going to up against, and we'll have to figure them out.
Okay, next question from the cloud. What is the best cloud provider when it comes to storing connected device-related data? There's a lot of them.
A lot of them. I don't want to say any one. I would say depends on what you're trying to do and what you are expecting that provider to do, right? How much heavy lifting do you want to do on the HIPAA front yourself? How much is kind of cost and scaling an issue? Those are all kind of different things. So Amazon Web Services is, probably the leader of the pack in many ways, and there's a lot of other things that are built on top of that. Datica, various other folks that have kind of more hand-holding in terms of HIPAA compliance than Amazon offers you, but you can do HIPAA compliance directly on Amazon. Microsoft Azure has some very good things going on, in particular on the database side, in terms of storing streaming data and such. And then, those are, I'd say, are the big ones. Then for things like genomic data, there are some very specialized providers that can really help you with that kind of stuff. So again, depends what you're trying to do.
And I think, a couple things to look for in a cloud provider is how easy is it to scale without re-architecting your application. So you want an application framework that allows you to create an application that will self-scale. Okay, it's not a simple task. And in addition to that the system be able to load level and expand connection levels as your system grows. And the third thing I would say is to guarantee that that system is recoverable within a certain amount of time if it goes down. So if there's Amazon web glitches every once in a while, you get notified your server is down. How fast can they recover those? Are they redundant and they have to shut down a whole data center? Can they map your application to another data center?
Yeah, you want to architect that from the start.
You want to architect that
across
from the start.
Different regions.
Right, and the different providers provide different tools for doing those things. Some are roll your own. It's like, okay, here, we give you these tools. Some are, we have a framework set up that does this for you. You're going to pay more for that, but you're going to have this built-in application that you didn't have to write.
I'd say one other thing there is looking at, how much DevOps work are you going to end up doing? So if you're going to do all the DevOps, basically, hey, operating this, monitoring it, and troubleshooting system yourself, that's one thing. If you're looking for, ISO 27001 compliant, DevOps folks, where are the biggest ecosystems around that? Amazon and to a lesser extent Microsoft have DevOps providers that can help you with that kind of stuff, that have those certifications.
Okay. What are the big device manufacturers, GE, Siemens, and Philips, doing to build connectivity into their devices, and how are they securing their devices? We all have NDAs.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Great question.
Cancel that question.
Unfortunately,
Let's see. So I'm going to ask a question based on a question that's here. What are the questions what happened to the question? Maybe they pulled it down. What are the questions that hospitals ask when you're going to deploy some type of connected device into that specific hospital?
then this is a great great Wild West right now, because many hospitals have their own procurement language and policies. Recently, the Mayo Clinic published those kinds of criteria, and you can actually go and pull that down. It says specifically if you want to sell to our into our hospital system, you have to comply. You have to be able to provide this kind of objective evidence. There's another document called an MDS2 or MDS squared. It's a manufacturer's disclosure statement around cybersecurity that comes from an IEC 80001 standard. And it is a document which, while many medical device companies and hospitals know about, it hasn't necessarily had as much uptake, but it does in fact have a lot of the right kinds of information codified in a very specific form and checklist that if you are not familiar with it, that's a good place to start. Currently, our organization, UL, has a cooperative research program going on with the VA hospital. The VA has publication 6500, which forms part of their procurement language. And so what are the kinds of things that are in there? They ask manufacturers, what encryption technologies do you use? How much testing have you done? What objective evidence can you provide for the product? What protocols are you communicating? There's a lot of different types of technical information. They have process information, service level agreements. How do you notifying them if you in fact discover a product has in fact a security breach? How are you going to manage software updates for the hospital network? So there's a lot of different kinds of questions that are a part of that. It is, I think, one of the greatest challenges today for which our organization is certainly interested in working with manufacturers and standardizing the language between medical device companies and hospital procurement so that we can, start with at least a good set of information that can be communicated. However, it's been our experience and what we've heard from our customers and from the industry that it's still very varied. Is that a word? And while there are good documents available, some hospitals can work with them, some cannot, and so it continues to be a challenge. So I think it's a great question. 80,001 MDS squared, it's a great place to start.
So from a startup perspective, there's a lot of startups that have a device in its early phase, and they want to collect data on that device. It might be software that is what I would call alpha revision software. It's validated. They know that the software is functional. It works. They want to establish a quick and safe mechanism to collect data in a clinic. When you go and tell the hospital that, they're going to say, well, you can't connect to our network. What do you can't connect to our network. So now the next question is, are you going to supply a server? So now you've got a separate server that's yours sitting in a clinic collecting potentially Wi-Fi data. And that gets to be a complex problem. And we see a lot of startups right now are struggling with this. I don't have full EMR interoperability right now. I want to collect data on my device. I want to connect to the hospital network, either to a local server or push through their server, push through their, what word am I looking for? Their router and their, what's the watchdog thing?
VPN?
VPN. The VPN and get to my own server. Well, you just can't punch out of a hospital to your own server. So I think this is an area where, from a startup standpoint, and getting devices into clinicals early and gathering this data is you kind of have to innovate on how you're going to collect this data. I mean, a lot of times it ends up being, you know what, I'm going to put a memory card on my data. I'm going to walk around at the end of the day and stick a USB stick in it because I just can't figure out how to get into the hospital infrastructure or how to get out. One way out of the hospital infrastructure is to put a cell phone in your device so you're not even connected to the hospital network. And that allows you quick data connectivity and collection for a clinical trial based on something which is outside the safety critical aspect of the data.
Well, I think you mentioned, I think you had a blog post on this in terms of some of the things that are coming down the pike in terms of LTE-M and other kind of low low power and really low cost cellular connectivity. I think you mentioned some of the pricing on those once they get ubiquitous, make it in a lot of cases a no-brainer to just connect that way, at least to my way of thinking.
Right, these are low-pan systems. They're low-power wide area networks. We're about to be inundated with low-power wide area networks. So a couple of them are Sigfox, LoRa, LTE-M. So what are these devices? So these are small battery-powered radios. They're designed to send small amounts of data periodically using very, very low power. And cities are putting in, not cities, but private companies are coming in and putting in infrastructure to collect all this IoT data. So now I could have a device sitting and collecting clinical data that I don't have to have a cell phone in it. I've got some low bandwidth connection where periodically I'm pushing data up without interfering with anybody else's network. The person doesn't have to go in and enter a Wi-Fi password, doesn't have to enter in any provisioning information. We're certainly going to see low power medical devices and monitoring devices with this low power wide area network. Eking it into clinics is what you're alluding to, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
What if we put this low power, low cost radio in there and just put it in the clinic and let it sneak the data out? It's going to happen.
One other thing on just where hospitals in past have gotten burned, or at least large systems have, is they let some device in, they didn't really do testing on the device, and it's really noisy and it's a bandwidth hog, and
coexistence.
It's a coexistence problem. So coexistence is a big deal. I know, it's part of Kaiser's checklist, for example. Any new device that comes in, they're going to do their own coexisting testing within their network.
And I've worked with a manufacturer who characterizes hospital networks as snowflakes, and that none of them are the same. And so, the connectivity issues too, and these networks change as well. So not only do products that are connected to them, if you enable remote updates, you change your device and all of a sudden now the product doesn't work on the network. Well, that happens on the network side as well. So I think this space is still very unsure, uncertain, and understanding what a generalized network looks like is really important. But being able to put some risk management around that, and if you're connected in, what are the kinds of things that your product must be robust to within that network, and what are the mechanisms and what are the things your product needs to be able to do to alert, alarm, or otherwise notify somebody if network configurations are going to change. So that's another challenge I've heard. I like that snowflake metaphor.
We had a question here. Somebody raise their hand.
Is there a thought process for the viability of creating sandboxes to do some of this testing and have it available for an organization like Matter that has a lot of these innovators, running through here? We use sandboxes.
I've been pushing for that and suggesting that, but it takes money to do that. HIMSS has a testing center. You guys have, there's a bunch of stuff out there,
Yeah.
but making it available to startups or other innovators would be a great idea. It's just not quite so.
Yeah, we do work with a couple of folks that actually do have sandboxes, interoperability sandboxes. One of those organizations is through Partners Healthcare, MDPMP, and CINIT, for the Center for
Connected Health, I think it's called.
Yeah, it's an acronym that doesn't CIMIT. But that's another organization that, and there are other businesses as well have very specific environments that we work with closely. So when companies come to us and say, I'd like to put my product into an environment and do usability testing around interoperability, to do connectivity testing, and in the presence of an EHR system that has data but not that is distanced from the actual hospital itself. So we have the ability to connect folks in that way as well.
Okay, we've got, let's see, we've got, you guys want to go a couple more minutes, a couple more questions? Okay, got another 200 questions. No, I'm just kidding. This is a good question. This is a labeling question, and it's something that we talked about. What, if any, responsibilities do medical device manufacturers have to educate consumers about potential security risks? Labeling requirements. That's the answer.
There you go. Siri, right?
Yeah, I have an answer. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you look at the documents for coexistence and the FDA's documents on security and cybersecurity risks, there's a section in there that says your labeling has to include issues that might occur from coexistence or potential cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is tougher, I think, than coexistence.
And that specifically is intended for the users and for the responsible organizations. Yeah, and I think what the aspect of this question.
Oh, it's manufacturers.
Oh, the manufacturer. Yeah, was the consumer aspect of it as well, right? But yeah, it absolutely what Michael said is that there's requirements. If you are relying upon networks, if you're relying upon the presence or absence of certain kinds of software functionality, if you have to have a specific amount of bandwidth, other kinds of attributes to assure the product is safe, to disclose that information. But I think that was a question around, are there responsibilities for manufacturers to educate consumers?
Yes.
Specifically around that, and that's where I was kind of scratching my head, because I'm not sure that necessarily is within the context of the guidance as well. But I think it's for the responsible organizations who are going to purchase the product. Now, if you're making a product intended for home use, then those are your users, right? And so that's important to be able to communicate. And to be conscientious, too, about what claims you are making about your security of your device. Because those claims within the documents not only are reviewed by the FDA, but our friends at the Federal Trade Commission also have the responsibility and have assumed the responsibility for protecting consumers against the failures of products to protect data and to protect consumers as well.
I'd say post-market surveillance becomes a more, on the one hand, you can collect more data, you can do an awful lot of things that can help you with post-market surveillance, but historically people have kind of treated post-market surveillance as I have to do it, but I'm not really, I'm going to do the minimum possible. In a connected world, that's not really possible anymore. So if you take it seriously, that becomes part of that process of looking at those things, seeing what could happen, what does happen, and then actively mitigating those risks, which could include educating consumers. Harder to do than to actually say you're going to do it, but it's plausible, yeah.
Okay, we'll take two more questions. A question from the room. Question from the cloud. The cloud. Okay. This is the next most popular question. How often do connected devices connect straight to the EHR? Which EHRs are better suited for this? So basically direct EHR connection versus through a gateway.
So that's hard to answer generally. I think EHRs that are already kind of cloud-based and managed outside of a hospital system can be easier to connect with, and are potentially less likely to be super customized. But there are all kinds of other things that are potentially barriers. You know, in some cases there are costs that the EMR vendor